We are among the top 10 most vulnerable islands, nation states in the world. These are my neighbors, my family, and friends. Without change, if we are lucky, we will become refugees. Without change, if we are unlucky, then we will be left to the mercy of future Hurricane Dorians. Today, we still have the chance to win the race against time and outrun the impact of climate change. Today, we can still do something.
Good morning and welcome to Climate Conversations. I'm Ewurabena Appiah and we are here at the beautiful Bahamas Resort. For the next 3 days, this will be a hub of activity as regional heads of government from around the Caribbean are here to discuss the very real impact of climate change on small island developing states like the Bahamas. What you just watched was the opening of the Caribbean Heads of Government meeting. These sessions will also set the stage for regional participation in the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference as well. Now, during that opening ceremony, Prime Minister the Honorable Philip Davis underscored the need for a unified regional voice on the issue of climate change. Following the passage of Hurricane Dorian, Prime Minister Davis has been one of several regional leaders championing the cause of Caribbean countries who now find themselves essentially dealing with the fallout from more intense heat waves, droughts, and of course, as we've experienced here at home, incredibly destructive hurricanes. This week, the Prime Minister and his counterparts are expected to chart the way forward. But exactly what is the way forward? To jumpstart our conversation, I'm joined now in studio by Shantez Gillette Wilson. Hello, good morning, and thank you so much for being here.
Good morning, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And later we'll be joined by Attorney General Ryan Pinder. But Shantez, I want to jump into things with you. Give us an idea of what was the feeling in the room, the mood in the room, and why is this conference really so important for the Bahamas and for the region?
I think that there was a real frisson of excitement, but more importantly, there was a real air of determination. I think that everyone in there came to work. This is a working meeting. All of the sessions are meant to have concrete results, specific action points afterwards. And as you know, the meeting will also result in a chair's note, which will solidify our stance as a region for the upcoming COP27, which is the United Nations' biggest climate change meeting later this year.
Okay, and heading into COP27, what are some of the goals that this meeting is hoping to accomplish?
So the meeting is on 4 main themes, and we're working towards solidifying essentially regional goals in each of those spaces. So we have mitigation, which is how do we prevent climate change from getting worse and, keep 1.5 degrees alive, make sure that we don't hit that 1.5 mark, at which point we're kind of at the point of no return. Right. So a lot of things around renewable energy and how we build policy around that as nations and as a region, and also how do we gather the support needed internationally in order for others to keep their commitments within those spaces. And then there is adaptation and loss and damage. Now, loss and damage is something that we here in the Bahamas can definitely relate to.
Absolutely.
We are still reeling from Dorian. So many of our people are still mourning the loss of loved ones, mourning the loss of their livelihoods, mourning the loss of their homes, still not back on the islands that they come from, not just from Dorian, even before that. We had Joaquin, we had Matthew, and I believe that $4.2 billion in damages and debt by just in the last 7 years from these kinds of storms. So it's that part we'll be looking into. How do we adapt to these increasingly extreme weather events, and then also how do we reclaim losses and damages, and some, I suppose, the imbalance within that space. There's also going to be a cross-cutting theme that'll look at things like tourism and sustainability, and how do we get into industries that or mitigate some of the spaces in those industries, and then also things like transparency. How do we ensure that this is a transparent process? So it'll be going through the full gamut of issues related to climate change, but ultimately what we want coming out of this is essentially, like I said, this chair's note and a unified voice as we lead up to COP27.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shantez, for being here. I do believe that we are going to make way for the Attorney General at this one. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So for the next several minutes, as you've heard, I will be here to facilitate all of the conversations that will take place over the next few days. But I do have some help in the person of Marcos Ambrister, who is our roving correspondent. Marcos, how are things looking on the outside?
Hi, Ewurabena. I'm here, and things are going great so far at the Caribbean Regional Heads of Government meeting in preparation for COP27. As you would have seen and as you would have heard, the Prime Minister has made the announcement that we are within the top 10 most susceptible nations within the world. And as your guests would have said, the top 3 in the world, actually. And so we're going to take a close look as to what climate change means for the Bahamas, and specifically those things that have been impacting us, like hurricanes. As we take a walk down memory lane, all of the hurricanes that would have impacted the Bahamas thus far. We know that the Bahamas is an archipelago, of course, made up of 700 islands, and it stretches from Florida straight down to the north of Cuba, and we are within the Bahama archipelago. Now, what makes us different from most other countries that are hit by hurricanes is that it's almost impossible to protect all 700 of our islands completely and thoroughly. And unfortunately, we have a lot of logistics that has to be mobilized when it comes to hurricanes. We have to evacuate people. We have to protect our borders. We have to ensure that we're able to provide all types of relief to every nation, to every island. When it comes to us, we've seen the increase of storms since the 2000s, starting from Hurricane Michelle in 2001. In 2001, we saw Hurricane Michelle hit at the very end of the hurricane season. That was in November 2001. September 2004, we would have seen Hurricane Francis as a Category 3 hurricane completely come through and impact the entire Bahamian archipelago. And this was the first time that would have happened since 1866. Imagine, every island of the Bahamas was definitely under threat from this hurricane. Then we venture into the 2010s. We had Hurricane Irene in Category 1. Hurricane Irene, which also escalated to a Category 3 in August of 2011, cost us damages of some $40 million. Then in October 2015, Category 4 Hurricane Joaquin affected some 7,000 people and of course caused major destruction to homes, and that cost us $120 million in loss. In October of 2016, we would have seen Hurricane Matthew made landfall on Grand Bahama as a Category 4 hurricane with $508 million worth of damages. September 2017, Hurricane Irma, Category 5, $131 million. Most damage was done in Inagua, Acklins, and Mayaguana. In September 2019, we would have seen Category 5 Hurricane Dorian move at an almost alarming speed of actually going down to 1 mile per hour, just sitting over Abaco and sitting over Grand Bahama and causing irreparable damages to those 2 islands. Luckily, some of our other islands were spared, but we would have seen all of the islands and its keys that were affected and attached to Grand Bahama and Abaco definitely took the brunt of that. The Bahamas has lost over $4.2 billion due to various hurricanes within our country in the past 7 years alone. And the tourism sector, specifically the primary economic engine of our country, has lost $1.2 billion in damage. As you can see, climate change is not just about, of course we know it's not just about hurricanes, but we can see that is the number one damage that climate change is causing here in the Bahamas. And so when we look at conferences like this and the championing that our Prime Minister is doing here in the Bahamas and within the region, we know that it's definitely necessary to ensure that we are able to survive in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years if we want to survive. Back to you, Ewurabena.
So much, Marcos. I know that's a lot of information to digest and to go through, but I appreciate it, and I look forward to all of the interesting conversations that I know that you're going to be having out there. Back here in studio, I'm joined by the Attorney General, Mr. Ryan Pinder. How you doing, sir?
I'm well. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's jump right in. This conference is the first of its kind here in the Bahamas. We have regional leaders from around the Caribbean, and we're also looking toward COP27.
Correct.
From your perspective, how important is this, and what is the ultimate goal of the government of the Bahamas?
Well, I think this is a vital conference to have with the heads of states from the region. We all know that as small island developing states and as a Caribbean region, we're highly vulnerable to climate change. We're highly vulnerable to the adverse impact that we see with increased emissions, increased greenhouse gases, increased temperatures. We are under threat of water rising, and we see the violent storms. And the Bahamas is not alone. The entire Caribbean region is vulnerable to this. And I think it's very important, especially leading into COP27, which is the United Nations premier climate change conference, that the countries in the region are on one accord. It is vital that we're at that point and stage right now that we see change. We see implementation of the promises over the many years from the large emitting countries, the large industrial countries. We need action. And when you go to a United Nations conference, it's a good opportunity for small countries like ours, because one country, one vote. We all have equal representation at the United Nations. They don't necessarily give higher weight to a larger country, a more industrial country. And if we can go as a region, as a bloc, and advocate for the same things, and advocate for immediate change, immediate impact, then I think that we achieve a lot for our region, and we achieve commitments from those countries who are the polluters. You would hear the Prime Minister always say that we are the results. We live the results of the pollution of the larger countries. And now it's time for them to act. It's time for some action, and to do so with a regional bloc is important. And we hope during the course of the next couple of days to be able to have the conversations and commitments from our regional neighbors to advance common goals leading into COP, to have a bloc and have the influence that's going to be necessary to really see the change, because we're going to be the ones that feel the impact first. And so we need the commitment of the world community to assist, not only in financing, but to adjust their ways, to adjust their methods, to adjust their lifestyles, to take into consideration the risks that we're all living in the Caribbean region.
Right. So let's talk about those conversations, because I don't imagine that they will be easy conversations to have. A lot of these countries are our allies. We depend on them for so many things. So how do we navigate really taking a stand for something like this, which is actually impacting the lives of Caribbean people and Bahamian people specifically, without altering or impacting that relationship with those larger countries?
Well, we're very fortunate to have such a strong and passionate leader as the Prime Minister in this country, and he's respected not only within the region but the world over. And I think that we come and we approach it in a manner that is not necessarily adversarial, but it is an issue that the world and all countries around the world are experiencing. I mean, we look in France right now. France is having violent fires due to the increase in temperatures. You would have looked at the news today. China has shut down an entire industrial city, all of their manufacturing plants, because of the high temperatures. It was some 104 degrees in China. And so this is a worldwide impact. And this is now affecting the major economies of the world. We're the most vulnerable, but they're getting the effects now, and they're living the effects now. So they're feeling the pain that we have felt with climate change. And I think that this is a great opportunity at COP27 to demand action, not promises, to demand implementation and not commitments.
I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, and we've had this conversation before about how the Bahamas plans to use carbon credits to our advantage. Where is the government in terms of making that program happen? I know the last time we had a conversation that was in the works. Where are we with that?
Sure, and this is an important aspect of the whole climate change initiative. We look to create a climate change economy in the country, where the country is benefiting off its natural resources that are by nature helping the larger industrial countries and the globe by absorbing emissions and absorbing carbon within our natural environment, and primarily seagrasses and mangroves, but within our natural environment. And you would know we're going up on our first year in office now next month, and it was a very aggressive agenda by the Prime Minister, and we would have passed 2 pieces of legislation to support the carbon credit regime. That would be the initial one would have been the carbon credit and climate change bill, which set out the regime for carbon credits and some commitments on climate change and emissions by the country. And then we followed that up with a carbon credit trading bill, which would establish a carbon credit exchange, the first in this hemisphere. And so we're advancing that. We have signed an agreement with a management company to help us monetize our carbon credits.
Okay.
That's Carbon Management Limited, supported by Beneath the Waves, which is a not-for-profit research institute that's been in the Bahamas for more than 10 years. And we are in discussions with a number of high-profile parties in the capital markets and exchange business to set up the first regional carbon credit exchange. We look to make meaningful progress on that by COP27. We look to have the exchange, the framework in place with strategic partners. And we look to be able to be in a position shortly thereafter to start maybe pre-selling some of our carbon credits. The first batch of carbon credit research is going to be verified within the next 2 weeks. We're sending it to the verification company. That takes a couple months for them to verify and so it's rather technical, but we're moving quickly on it, and we look to have this be an arm of our climate resiliency going forward. We have to do a number of things. We have to, you would have heard the Prime Minister speak today in the opening about the importance of our biodiversity and our living lands, he termed it, and that's a term coming out of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, where our biodiversity is important and actually absorbs carbon itself and helps with the climate change. And the Bahamas has always been a leader in that. We protect sharks, we protect turtles, we have some of the largest marine protected areas in the world, and we are a world leader in living lands preservation and preserving our biodiversity. And all of this comes together to help provide a framework to combat climate change. Certainly small countries like the Bahamas in the region are punching above their belt in this regard, and we hope to give some lessons to the larger countries on how to do it.
Okay, this seems to be a very technical conversation. For those persons who may not fully understand the scope of this, what are some of the immediate things that everyday Bahamians can be doing to impact climate change at their level?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. And certainly the movement towards renewable energy is important, even at the smallest levels. And so moving towards solar, for those who are able, that's an important characteristic. I have solar on my house that effectively takes my house off the grid during the daytime and back on the grid at night. That helps with the consumption of fossil fuels, and those are important aspects to consider. You may not need your air conditioning on at 72 degrees. 74 degrees may be okay, and that actually helps a lot with the fossil fuel burn.
Attorney General, it's hot outside, though.
I know it's hot outside. I know it's hot outside. We're looking at cleaner energy as well for the country. We're exploring LNG, which will take us off of that heavy fuel that emits all of the emissions and the carbon and the smoke. Many people would have heard for a number of years the discussion about greenhouse gases and why we're getting warmer because of what greenhouse gases are is the burning of fuel and hydrocarbons.
Right.
And so if we can minimize that consumption, that goes a long way in contributing to the climate change initiative from the Bahamas point of view. Being a little bit more sensitive to your biodiversity, your marine wildlife. Those are all important characteristics that will catapult the Bahamas as a world leader to combat climate change.
Well, I think in a post-Dorian era, I think all of us are a little more hyper-aware of some of those things and what we need to see happening. In terms of what the government is continuing to do in the space of holding other countries accountable, how successful do you really feel like this push from the regional bloc is going to be?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Going at it alone, you're just one of 100 and some countries in the United Nations. Going at it with agreement amongst a regional bloc, you now have 12, 15, 16 different countries all championing the same thing. And that's what's important by this conference. You would have heard the Prime Minister speak about coming up at the end of the conference with a position paper where the collective bloc can agree. And these are going to be the deliverables that we seek at COP27 as a bloc. And we look to go and look with our allies and say these are the types of things that we're pursuing. So we may do a visit to Washington and say, okay, United States, you're our allies, you're our neighbors. These are the 3 or 4 things the Caribbean think are vital to combating climate change, and we want your support at COP27. And that's the way, from a diplomatic point of view, that we get our message across. I'm rather confident that with the leadership of the Prime Minister, his progressive agenda, that we will be able to go to Egypt and get meaningful change for the country and meaningful change for the region.
Right. We know some of the general concerns that we experience here at home. What are some of the concerns that you have heard from your counterparts in other parts of the region? What are their concerns regarding climate change?
Well, climate change, as we see in the Bahamas, creates destructive mechanisms. And the Prime Minister would have made the point this morning that in the Bahamas, 50% of our outstanding debt can be tied to, in some form or fashion, adverse effects of climate change. We're not alone in that. We know that hurricanes don't only come to the Bahamas, hurricanes come throughout the Caribbean region. Many of our neighbors have experienced the same thing. And that translates into real issues for everybody in the country. If we have an elevated debt load, we have to figure out how to pay it. And then that means sometimes taxes get raised. Sometimes we're not spending in areas we would want to prioritize because we have to manage the debt load. To the extent that we can come up with ideas on creative financing, the Prime Minister would have talked about loss and damages. What that means is the loss that we experience due to climate change that has occurred because of other countries, those other countries should have an obligation to compensate.
Right.
And that's what the loss and damages concept means. Well, that is something that as a region we're going to have to push rather aggressively because we cannot drown under the debt load that's created by the activities of the larger countries. There has to be some equity in this. There has to be some remuneration, some compensation for our loss. And if we can achieve some of those goals, I think it would allow us to be in a better position, one, to manage the debt, but two, to be able to address more concerns of Bahamians throughout the country, give us the ability to be a lot more flexible, like we all want to be. We have great concerns. We have to build hospitals. Yeah. We have to build new schools. We have to provide the infrastructure so Bahamians can live their day-to-day lives and prosper. Yeah. We have to give them an environment of low taxation. All of these things are vital to the growth of the country. And a major part, if 50% of your debt is attributable to climate change, that should be a focus, and it is absolutely a focus of the Prime Minister.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely, anytime.
It's been a great conversation. You've given us a lot to think about. Final question, what are you most looking forward from the conference? Well,
it's always nice to meet your colleagues around the country. I had the opportunity last night to greet the Premier of the Cayman Islands, Mr. Wayne Panton. And it just so happened that when I was Minister of Financial Services here, he was Minister of Financial Services in the Cayman Islands. And I hadn't seen him for a number of years. So that's always nice to be able to see some of your colleagues. But most importantly, I think it is to get the firm commitments of our neighbors on a way forward. We have to be in a mindset, not just to come up with ideas. We have to be in a mindset that we put forward deliverables that must be met. And those are sometimes difficult conversations. Sometimes, you don't agree on all things. But if we can find a degree of commonality amongst ourselves for the benefit of our region, benefit of our citizens, benefit of our countries and our viability, then I think that is going to be one of the most exciting outcomes of this conference.
Absolutely. Thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
I will. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very interesting conversation. We're so happy to have the Attorney General with us, joining us, and I hope that he is going to make good on all of these promises to hold some people accountable on our behalf. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As he leaves, we're going to welcome back Ms. Shantez Dillett Wilson, who is going to continue our conversation on climate change in just a moment. In the meantime, let's go out to Marcos Ambrister and see how he's doing out in the field.
Thanks, Ewurabena. Thanks, Ewurabena. It's going so great so far. I was able to meet some of the youth activists actually within the Caribbean region here. I've seen so many persons here from Anguilla, the Cayman Islands, Barbados. I've even seen some of our neighbors from Turks and Caicos. And everybody here seems so excited to begin the work that is necessary to ensure that our nation and our region is represented at COP27. Everyone so far is looking forward to getting ready to set some goals and definitely stick to them and ensure that we have great representation, and we are looking forward to all of the outcomes that are going to come from this conference. Back to you, Ewurabena.
Thank you very much, Marcos. I'm joined again by Shantez Gillette Wilson. Thank you so much for coming back and talking to us. So we had a great opportunity to speak with the Attorney General, and he's talked about really holding some people accountable. In your opinion, what does that look like for the Bahamas specifically?
I think that there are a number of different ways that could look. I think first and foremost, when we're talking about on an international stage, holding persons accountable, that means holding certain industrialized countries and then also multinational corporations to hold to the commitments that they have made to the United Nations, but more importantly to the world. These are commitments that they've already, put forward. This is not something new that we're asking of them. So to keep to the commitments that they've put forward to lower their emissions, to invest in climate change initiatives, especially in countries that are most vulnerable, like the Bahamas, to get the blue carbon markets up and running, so that we can facilitate more of that investment, get better funding into the hands of people who most need it, and just in general to pursue climate justice, to make sure that those who are most impacted by this, who are often also most vulnerable in other ways, the poor amongst us, the poorest countries, both and individuals, and then also, those who in other ways don't have the ways to the means to protect themselves.
I love that you use the phrase climate justice.
Oh yes,
because let's talk about that. In terms of that as a theory and as an action, a course of action, what should we be looking for in terms of climate justice?
Climate justice. So I'm not a climate expert, but I'm all about the justice.
Right. We all are.
So with regards to climate justice, what we're seeing, and this is across the world, but we can definitely see it here in the Bahamas too, is that as the temperature creeps up and all of these impacts happen, those that are most vulnerable amongst us are the ones that are hit the hardest. People who are vulnerable in other ways. So women, children, the poor, etc., the sick, the disabled. We see intersections all across the board that they are the ones that are most impacted. And in the same way, if you were displaced by a hurricane, those who are going to get hit the hardest by that are the persons who don't have the funds to find another place, the education or the means to find another job, etc. Just to put it very squarely in our recent history. But we see this across the world. So as far as climate justice, what we're looking for is those who are creating the biggest impact on the change in climate, those who are creating the most emissions and other types of pollutants and otherwise, contributing most to all of the changes that we're seeing in the climate right now, to ensure that they are held accountable, to mitigate the changes that they are impacting. So essentially to stop creating so many emissions, to lower their emissions, to become carbon neutral or even carbon negative, but also then to ensure that they are working to undo some of the damage that is indirectly caused by what they've done. So, ensuring that they are investing back into communities that might not have access to water, or investing back into communities that have been impacted by terrible climate events like Hurricane Dorian, making sure that they are being responsible, essentially, about the way that they're utilizing their investment funds in spaces.
Absolutely.
In these spaces.
So we are going to throw it to our roving correspondent, Marcos Ambrister, who I understand is with a very special guest, someone who is also extremely passionate about climate change. Marcos, please let me know when you're ready. I'm interested to see who you have with you.
Hi, Ewurabena. So I am here with the newly crowned Miss Bahamas Universe, none other than Miss Angel Cartwright. Angel, can you tell us a little bit about what you are so excited about for this conference?
Well, firstly, I'm excited that it's actually being hosted in the Bahamas. I believe that the Bahamas has such an important voice when it comes to climate change because as a nation of shallow waters, climate change is going to affect us first.
That's definitely certain. Can you tell us a little bit about what exactly you're looking to do at the universe level, at the Miss Universe level, when it comes to, ensuring that the Bahamas and other nations that are also susceptible to things like climate change are actually heard of?
Well, first I would like to raise awareness to the effects of climate change. We recently had Hurricane Dorian that displaced so many Bahamians and residents in our country, and also the similar effects around the region and around the world. So just seeing what we can do as a collective to empower our small nations to create a global voice and global reach.
And that is definitely something that we're looking forward to hearing from you. And of course, I'm sure you're going to reach together with a lot of the other queens from the Caribbean to ensure that we have a unified front when it comes to representation and ensuring and lobbying for climate change. Can you tell me a little bit about any projects that might be in the working very soon for you?
Yes, well, I've partnered with the Bahamas National Trust as a contestant leading up to the Miss Bahamas Universe competition, and there are several mangrove planting projects coming up. The importance of mangroves to our coastline is that they slow down the tides as they approach during the hurricane season and protect us from flooding. I also will be partnering with the Prairie Institute for Marine Science to encourage coral restoration and to help them with the permits for the treatment of coral against stony coral tissue loss disease.
So you've heard it here first: coral restoration, mangrove protection, all of that from our Miss Bahamas Universe, Miss Angel Cartwright. Not just beauty, but definitely brains, and she will be lobbying for the Bahamas as it relates to climate change. Thank you so much for joining us, Angel.
As well.
Thank you. Back to you, Ewurabena.
Thank you so much, Marcos, and thank you so much to Angel as well. Back here in studio, I have another special guest. I'm joined now by Dr. Donald Cooper, who is the Director of Transparency Division for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and its Paris Agreement. Dr. Cooper, thank you so much for being here this morning.
A pleasure.
Thank you. So let's talk about what your role entails. You are the Director of Transparency. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, our convention and the Paris Agreement is infamous for all of these vague terms that end up having lots of legal connotations. Transparency is simply the ability to count. In other words, if you wanted to sell 10 apples to someone, the person who's selling it has to show they have 10 apples, and the person who's buying it have to say, I have 10 apples and here's my $10 in exchange. We are the one in between that says, yes, they were 10 apples, and yes, there was $10, and the exchange took place. So when a country gives a commitment globally, if the United States says we are going to lower our emissions within 10 years by this amount, it is not simply accepted. The global community has a mechanism whereby we go and inspect the United States every 2 years to make sure that they're living up to their commitments. So when they say they're going to provide financial resources, we will be doing the same thing under the Paris Agreement. So the Transparency Division is the one that holds everybody accountable to each commitment that they give.
Shantez alluded earlier to the Keep 1.5 Alive campaign, this sort of thrust that is being pushed right now. Tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean, and why is that important for all of us to be paying attention to?
It is important to note that the measurement for when global temperatures need to stay below a certain level is marked by the turn of the century, so 2100. And at the current pace, the world is on an increase of between 2 and 2.5 degrees. It has been reported by scientists that the minimum level that we can adequately adapt to is if we keep that below 2 degrees by 2100. And a more realistic figure is if we can keep it below 1.5.
Understood.
So the world keeps targeting as a minimum now, don't let temperatures go above 1.5 by 2100. In order to achieve that, you need to reduce those levels now. Otherwise, we have no chance of making it. We have been able to reduce that projection from about 3.6 degrees down to about 2.5, 2.3, 2.5, but it is not enough. It is not good enough. So the world has to push. So there's a strong push now for everyone. Remember 1.5, keep that thought alive, and let's target that.
A lot of people may see climate change and rising temperatures sort of an isolated issue. How does that exacerbate, so many of the other social and economic issues that the country, the globe continues to face?
Unfortunately, we wish climate was an isolated matter, but climate is not a thing. Climate is a way of life. It is your very existence and how you as a country or as a person develop. It is your education, your healthcare, your tourism, your energy supply, every single thing. It doesn't matter how poor or how wealthy a country is if it doesn't exist anymore. See? So as the sea levels rise, particularly small island developing states, you will begin to see more and more of your land go away. But worse than that, the inland lakes, marshes, all of your groundwater, which floats on top of the salt water, as sea level rise, then that disappears. The Bahamas has been very fortunate in that either by great planning or pure luck, it switched its water production from groundwater to reverse osmosis. Right? So you mitigated, you adapted exceptionally well ahead of having to do it. Most countries have not done that, so they will suffer the consequences. So when you think about what if Dorian happens every 3 or 4 years, right? So
that's a scary thought.
Yeah, that's not climate.
No,
that's your way of life. That's your very existence. What if the rainfall stopped being predictable? You get nothing. And then you get a huge drought that swamps everything out. What about seas rising and then the waves washing over your roadways that are along the coast? And you have to constantly replace all the infrastructure. So it is everything about the development of a country, which is why it's regarded as the #1 issue in the world. Even though we have issues with Ukraine, COVID, climate is still considered to be the #1 thing that the world needs to address.
We've heard so many people come through so far and talk about the importance of this. The Bahamas in a post-Dorian era. Can you speak to why all of us, especially those of us here at home, should be thinking about climate change from that very sort of 360 view?
The way in which climate issues are addressed are almost always how does your way of life change? Not how does the country pass a law, but how you as an individual will live. And the choices you make are the ones that generate big end results. For example, if most Bahamians decide that it's a great fashion trend to move away from buying large gasoline or diesel-powered cars to cute and really funny-looking electric ones to run around. It's a popular choice, but it makes a big difference.
Impact, right.
In addition, if Bahamians decide that their energy source should be renewable, not because they are helping the planet, but because it's a fraction of the cost of the other one, right?
Well, it's a big factor.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, you put back in everybody's pay packet an extra $150, $200 a month simply because you didn't have to pay it out in utility costs, right? Or when you create new industry, new high-paying jobs, because Bahamians decide, like in Barbados, everybody's hot water needs will come from a solar water heater on the roof, right? And you create this new industry for solar water heaters, right? So all of these are impacting individuals.
Yeah.
So when you look at what do I do, right? And how does it affect me? That has the overall big picture effect.
As someone who operates within this space, are you satisfied with the pace that regional governments are really coming on board and taking on all of, or considering all of the elements that have to happen in order for us to keep the 1.5 alive, as you mentioned?
I am very satisfied that the regional governments have the strong desire and willingness to act to ensure that we are below the 1.5 as far as we can go. I'm also very comfortable that developed countries and partners are also very willing. We tend to get caught up in what does the piece of paper with the words on it look like. And as you know, once you start to put down words on a piece of paper, then people start ensuring that their interests are protected because it's a legally binding document. However, in the thinking and the actions that those countries, either the regional ones or the larger emitters, their actions tend to be in the right direction.
Right.
One of the limitations that often comes up is that many countries don't know what they need to do. They know they need to do something. But what is that something? I was in a meeting about 7 years ago with many of the big multilateral banks, donors, and we were discussing how can we take the Paris Agreement, nationally determined contributions, and make them real. Right? Just make them real.
Yeah, because that's really what people want. It needs something tangible, right?
Yeah, right. And we determined that for small island developing states, all 65 or 66 of them, the cost was within the limits that our organization controlled, where we could finance every single thing in their nationally determined contribution, if that would mean the problem was solved for them. When we began to look at their NDCs and discuss it with them, then you realize that, oh yes, I just got a consultant to write that document. It doesn't really reflect what my national position was.
Understood.
So here you had a situation where the global community was willing to look at just, let's solve this problem for them.
Right.
But they could not say what it was that needed to be done. Right? So now the big point about the meeting that's happening here in the Bahamas is that is exactly what they're doing. They are determining what they need to do.
Okay, Dr. Cooper, I understand that our roving correspondent Marcus Ambrister has a special guest with him. Marcus, we're coming to you. Who do you have?
Thank you so much, Ewurabena. I am joined here by Minister Miles Larota, Minister of State within the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for national disaster preparedness and management, as well as NEMA. Minister Larota, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you.
That is awesome. As we are here preparing and making plans for COP27 and ensuring that we present ourselves as a regional front, can you tell me some of the outcomes that you are expecting from this conference?
Well, from we became the administration, I attended the UN's General Assembly last year. I also attended CHOGM this year, and the Prime Minister's position has been very clear that small island developing states like the Bahamas, even though we contribute very little to climate change, we are bearing the brunt of climate change. The Prime Minister has said repeatedly that the national debt, around $10 billion, at least 50% of that could be directly impacted by the last 4 hurricanes from 2015 to 2019. So that gives you the severity of this problem. And the Prime Minister's position, as he continued to go over the world speaking on this topic, is that the time for talk has basically ended. The incoming chair of COP27 from Egypt has repeated that this morning in his address to the regional heads, and that we are at the stage now where small countries want to collect. You know, there have been pledges of up to $100 billion by those developed countries who contribute 80% to climate change, of which very little of that has been actually put into these small island states. And so the Bahamas position is one where we are paying more because we are considered a risk now because of our hurricane situation. And so we are telling those big countries we are sitting in this hurricane zone, disaster zone. We are impacted at least 6 months out the year. I think the first storm this year or depression would have been May, when hurricane season starts, June the 1st. And the storms are getting more severe. It's getting more frequent. The cost of insurance is going up. And, we are bearing that cost even though, we contribute very little. And so, in short, the story is we need assistance, economic assistance, financial assistance, as we journey through this yearly exercise, because this is not just a one-off. Every year we have to deal with at least 6 months of the year living with hurricanes as a possibility.
And we know it never ends. And of course, as we deal with climate change, we know that one of the effects of it is the rising sea levels, the warming of the temperatures. And of course, that's now resulting in numerous hurricanes for us, of course, even more severe hurricanes. As the minister responsible for the Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, can you tell us a little bit about what's been going on within your ministry to prepare for this season?
Well, I just came back from a 5-day conference in Hawaii last week where I attended the Pacific Disaster Center in Maui. I met with the president of the PDC. I also spoke with representatives of the University of Hawaii, which is leading the disaster preparedness, mitigation, response worldwide. And I don't want to get ahead of it, but we are seeing analytical data that suggests that these storms are becoming much more frequent, they're becoming much more severe, and the small islands, in particular like the Caribbean, we are seeing, and also some countries in the Pacific, also small countries, it's just bearing down on them more and more and more and more. Actually, we're seeing images now how these storms would affect the country. There was a simulation that was given with regard to New Providence, where 70% of the Bahamian population live. And a Cat 5 storm with the intensity of Dorian, about 75 to 80% of Nassau would be underwater. Imagine the economic engine of the country sustaining a hit like that, and it was very sobering. The cutting edge technology allowed them to zero in on my house, and which would be completely submerged. I live in the southeastern end of the island. And so to see these things and to see the data, to see the risk vulnerability of the Bahamas, and we think of risk vulnerability and we just think of hurricane. No, it's more than that. It's our shelters. It's also poverty. It's the elderly who don't have the ability to prepare or take care of themselves afterwards. And so disaster risk management is much more than just having the old fire chief in charge. It's really cutting edge technology of which the Bahamas is going to have to be at the forefront if we want to survive.
And so, Ewurabena, you can see that this conference is not going to be one just about talk. It's definitely going to be substantive. We're going to see results, and we're going to see change for small island nations like the Bahamas. Back to you, Ewurabena.
Thank you so much, Marcos. Joining me now in studio is former Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christie. How are you doing, sir?
A pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here.
I don't know how I got here this morning, but it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm glad that you decided to stop by. So this conference is a culmination of a lot of work, which also started under your administration. Can you talk about the journey and what it means to you to see this conference being hosted here at home?
Well, firstly, I'm so happy to see the role our current Prime Minister is playing, and the fact that he is being aggressive in dealing with the issue of climate change and reaching out to countries in the region as well as in the world. It's so important that the Bahamas, being a very vulnerable island, the closest offshore island to the United States of America, uses its prominence and strategic positioning to represent all of the island states in the region who are vulnerable economically to impacts of climate change. When I was Prime Minister, I had the privilege to sign the Paris Accord on behalf of our country. And leading up to that, we were in discussions with specific island states who were saying that they were already losing ground to the ocean. And we in the Bahamas, when we make the point, we had better understand that there is a lot of evidence to date to show our vulnerability. Not just Dorian and its impact, but you can go to places in the Bahamas and see where people once used to be on the beach is now ocean, right? Whether it's in Grand Bahama, whether it's in Long Island, whether it's an Adelaide beach, right? That the ocean is slowly claiming the land, all right? And we ought not to ask ourselves whether or not the evidence exists. During Hurricane Matthew, I was lowered from a DEA helicopter into the Berries in Long Island, where it had been cut off from the mainland. The water had gone over. We've seen that happen in Grand Bahama.
Yeah.
One day, the water may not regress, okay? And so we therefore, as an island nation, over 100,000 square miles of ocean, we know, okay, that we are prominent in terms of what we do as a country, what we represent as a country, our economy as a country, in terms of the millions of tourists that come here. And therefore, to preserve our economy is an incredible challenge in today's world with the challenges of environmental health. You know, I was a part of superintending the Disaster Preparedness Act in the Bahamas. And I kept on looking at that act because the act itself defined strategically the challenges to our country and what we ought to try to protect ourselves against. And so, again, we must not take for granted that there are structures in place that are effective and are working when a disaster comes upon us. It is always work in progress. And what I would say to our government is that we must, it's an everyday affair. I was happy to listen to Minister Laroda. This is an everyday affair where the government must constantly work at disaster preparedness and anticipating impacts and how we should go about mitigating those impacts. Because that, if really, is our existence as a country. And the vulnerability and the impacts of Dorian was so profound that the entire world watched what happened when a Hurricane 5 hits. And so for me, I think the progress we made, listening to other countries speak, and you know, you'd sit and you'd listen to a prime minister say that when I was a child, I used to go to picnics, but now when I go to that place, it's ocean. My mother used to take me to this particular place on this island in the Pacific, and when I go there now, it's ocean. That's happening here in the Bahamas.
It is.
You know, people can point out in East Grand Bahama, okay, where the ocean is now. They point out to the sea and say, we used to picnic out there. We had a hut out there in the ocean. That is so profoundly serious and important because it means that unless we could find a way to effectively put in place a strategy to deal with this, the existence of our country is at stake.
There's been a lot of talk today about, you know, the need for climate justice, the need to be able to hold larger countries who are responsible for a lot of the emissions responsible to provide funding, to provide support. And you touched on the aggressive stance that this government seems to be taking toward that. Do you think that that is something that, or that conversation is going to be one which is received well?
Again, politics being what it is. You can look at the United States of America. You can see one party is for strong involvement in climate change and the other is not. So the working of the American democracy and the working of democracies in the developed world is significant as to the, I think, the chances we have of the industrialized countries recognizing they are the main contributors or the contributors, okay, to the disastrous effects of climate change. And President Joe Biden, when he came in, recognized it. In conversations we had when he was vice president and I was chair of CARICOM, we had, and he clearly was aware, okay, of the need for America to be strongly involved. President Obama, similarly, was strongly involved in that, because they had agreed to contribute significantly to a fund that would assist countries like ours. And so the workings of democracy will determine what happens to the strategy that nations should adopt in climate change. The countries with the money and who are able to make the major contributors, politically, the people of their countries must buy into it.
Absolutely.
And must vote them back into power, who will be positive in their impacts for countries like ours. What is important about this conference is that every effort we make as a region, all right, to share our knowledge, to share our experiences, to agree on levels of vulnerability that we have, and to agree on strategies in being able to approach the outside world. Absolutely. There is no excuse for our not having a strong, united approach to the outside world as a region. And that is, I'm very hopeful that Brave Davis appears to grasp that point. And in his initial offerings on climate change, we feel very comfortable with the approach he's taking, and we want to encourage that, because it is so critical that people in our region understand their vulnerability, and it's important. And I'm so happy that we as a country, having the experiences of Abaco and Grand Bahama, always having these major impacts and challenges, and then to see it happen in the southern Bahamas with Matthew, to watch the sea come over the land in South Beach, on New Providence, it's a major occurrence in Matthew. And so these are things we know now, and therefore we can say to the world, we've seen islands cut off. We've seen the oceans go over parts of islands, and therefore we don't have to guess on this matter. This is the reality that we're facing, and you, the industrialized world, must recognize you have a significant role to play in mitigating and ensuring that 100 years from today, there will be a place called the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chris, for being
My
here.
pleasure.
I really appreciate you coming in and sharing this sort of full circle moment with us. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For the time being, we hope you've been enjoying our conversation, but right now we're going to throw it over to our social media correspondent, Javon Williams, who is going to field a few questions that have come in over the past few minutes. Javon?
Thanks, Ewurabena. Ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you that our OPM social media page has been buzzing with questions for our special guests, Dr. Cooper and Miss Larissa Cartwright. So we're going to get right into it. Dr. Cooper, our first question is from Alex Smith from New Providence. And he asks, the damage created by these strong hurricanes cost the government millions in repairs. How can the region pool its resources to assist small island countries with this financial strain?
Thank you. Excellent question. I think you need to broaden the response a little further. Firstly, in anticipation, one of the things that as a group the Caribbean countries can do better than individually is establishing resources in an emergency pool which they can access immediately when they are impacted, to address the matter of insurance so that they can address then the medium to long-term solutions, and then to work with their partners on ensuring that the minimum amount of damage is done to their infrastructure, knowing that an event is somewhere in the future. So with this, you minimize the level of the exposure that you will have. At the same time, there are established global mechanisms out there to assist those countries, not loan them money, but to assist them in being able to address these kinds of issues. I also think that one of the strong things that the Caribbean countries have been doing is identifying where those national impacts have come from global occurrences. In other words, when did climate change have a significant impact in causing you to have that debt? Right? And can that process of looking at that debt be addressed as a part of the climate process? And I have seen advancement along those lines. However, as an individual country, it is very difficult to make headway. But as a group of countries who are similarly impacted, they're all in the hurricane belt, then the chances of success are much greater. So I suggest that think bigger, and also think more of these are things which our country needs, and the world out there is looking how to provide our needs because of the climate impacts.
Wow, wonderful. We have sort of a follow-up question from Mark Roberts, and he says, does government spending as a result of major hurricanes really impact the country's growth?
I think here you need to separate two things. Once you've been impacted by a major hurricane, there is very little options that you have. You cannot simply not respond. Right? So governments will often have to take whatever measures, and normally they are not very productive measures, to access resources to provide relief to people, and then try to put back in place the infrastructure. And as with the first question, where do you go to get that access? It is possible today for the Caribbean countries to enter into discussions about establishing such a fund that they can access immediately. Right? So it isn't a question of whether the funding is building your national development. At that stage, national development is not in your mind. National survival is in your mind.
So true.
Once you've dealt with national survival, then the opportunity is there. Globally, during the recovery from COVID, they were talking about building back better. This then applies to your actions you take after a natural disaster. Do you build it back the way it was?
Yes.
Or do you try to build it back better? Unfortunately, in most cases, we build it back the way it was. So, but now I'm hoping that people see that building it back better.
So true, so true. We have a question from Maya Demerit, and she asks, I have heard people talk about what companies and governments can do to help climate change. But what can those of us regular citizens who want to make a difference do?
Oh, this is actually more important than what the big companies do and so on. Because you as a consumer, you as a citizen in the country, you are driving what the country does. You and all of your friends, if you and all of your friends take action to say, I think yellow electric cars are cute, and I would like to own one, and you and all your friends decide you wish to own one, it doesn't matter what the policy is for importing cars into the Bahamas. People will simply buy electric cars.
Yes.
Or if you think that paying to heat the water from my house is too expensive, I'm going to put a solar water heater on my roof. Yes, you are helping climate, but you're just simply reducing your costs. But if you and 100,000 of your friends decide to do the same thing, it is what drives policy. Finally, governments take action based on the protection and the needs of their citizens. And their citizens are their people, their corporate citizens, and so on. And if they feel as though their citizens will be harmed if they went to step number 8, but they are okay if I went to step number 5, then they will take the process to step number 5. But if the people tell them, hey, it's okay to go to step number 8, then they will go to step number 8. So it's the power of the people. We saw this in the United States just before the Paris Agreement. They were going to limit how far they could go in order to be able to ensure that there weren't hardships for their companies. A lot of the big companies told them, oh, no, that's okay. We've already adjusted to that. You can move further. So the voice of people, individuals, and you and a couple 100,000 of your friends makes a strong difference as to what global and national policy would be.
The power of the people, absolutely true. Yeah. I have a final question from you from Ms. Kummer, and she's from Freeport. And she says, we know that fixing climate change won't happen overnight. So what can the government do to help those of us who are most vulnerable to the effects of hurricanes?
Firstly, the world is not as difficult to move as we thought it was.
Okay.
Right? 3 years ago, COVID-19 turned up, and the world completely changed, almost overnight. Right? Completely changed. Nobody thought that level of adjustment was possible. So the fact that you cannot address climate in a short period of time is probably not a realistic statement. It's just a matter of, do you wish to? Can you push all of the levers in the same direction? Now, in terms of what government can do to facilitate assisting people, one of the reasons why many people have difficulty in rebuilding is because they don't have the necessary insurance to be able to cover the cost. So they have to go and look for it, either personal resources or elsewhere. Governments want to help, but they also don't have the insurance.
Yes.
Right? But the insurance does exist. So one of the things that can be done is, before a hurricane shows up, the governments can look to establish insurance pools, which can then cater to making it affordable, let's say very affordable, for Bahamians to be able to get the insurance. Not everyone will, but it will move a significant number of people back into that category where they can recover.
Yes.
But the government can also do a similar thing for itself.
Yes.
So the airport went down, the roads went out, the port went down, but they are covered by your catastrophic insurance. You can ask major countries who wish to assist. Maybe I don't need, that's not right. I'm not asking today for $500 million, but I am asking for $20 million to cover the insurance premiums for the next 3 years for catastrophic insurance for the Bahamas.
Yes.
And many countries would say that is a reasonable request.
Yes.
We can assist you with that.
Yes.
For that individual who was in Freeport, then all of a sudden, instead of paying $5,000 for disaster insurance, it might be $500.
That's a big
and
difference.
Then maybe then I can say, yes, I can afford that.
Yes.
So these are the kinds of actions that governments can take that have a direct bearing on individuals.
Your responses are so good. I'm going to ask you one more question. We have Mr. Neely from the island of Eleuthera, and the question reads, do we really believe that our small country and region can get the big countries of the world to listen to us?
Oh, and this comes up a lot. You would be amazed at what drive the small island states have globally. There are only 2 categories of countries that are recognized as special in climate regime. One of them is the least developed countries, and the other one is the small island developing states. Loads and loads of groups tried to get special recognition, and it was refused. So you are already considered special. You don't have to argue to be special. Wow. You are already special. You have to determine, what does special mean? I mean, what do I need to get out of my special relationship? Give you an example. In Australia, they are so much linked with the Pacific Island states, right, that Australia would go out of their way to provide assistance to all of those Pacific Island states. So much so that Australia provided the bulk of the solar power generation capacity in all of those island states because of the relationship they have with the islands, and that they do not wish to be able to be seen as taking any action that does not support the small island developing states.
Fantastic, sir. Fantastic. I want to thank you, Dr. Cooper, for giving us that valuable information. And back to you, Ewurabena.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. Joining me now in studio is Larissa Cartwright. Thank you so much for being here. She is an environmental and climate change advisor in the Office of the Prime Minister. Now, you heard a lot of the social media questions that came in, and a lot of people are concerned, one, about whether or not the Bahamas and this position that we're taking with the region will actually be able to to have impact, and two, whether or not this conversation about what larger countries need to do is going to be received well. In your space, having been an advisor to the government on this issue, what are your thoughts?
So I think what's critical here is the fact that heads of government have come to our country together to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
The fact that we would have received acceptance from prime ministers who are very busy to come and discuss this topic is a testament of how important it is. Leading up to COP27, it's so important, it's so critical for the leaders of the world to have an understanding, particularly those in the special regions, as your previous guests would have shared, particularly those that are gravely impacted by climate change. And so this gives us the opportunity to devise a plan that we can lay out, we can express our concerns and bring the solutions to the table. And while bringing the solutions to the table, we understand that we need to seek much technical support, much financial support from the bigger countries to help us, because it is very critical to our very existence. So this conversation is a very important one.
Okay. In terms of some of the things that we've discussed here today and some of the things that you've seen here today, what is your biggest hope for this conference?
So my biggest hope from this conference, I think one of the persons would have asked about this being a talk shop. And the biggest outcome for us is that this creates something tangible. And so that's my hope. It's my hope that we would not have gathered heads here today without us being able to come out of this meeting with something that we take to the global platform and express as a strong position of the Caribbean region. That's my biggest hope.
Thank you so much, Larissa. Thank you so much for being here. Before we wrap up our live this morning, I would like to kick it one more time to our roving correspondent, Marcos Ambrister. Marcos, how are you? What's going on the outside?
Hi, Ewurabena. I am here on the outside. Hi, Ewurabena. I'm here on the outside at our regional heads of government meeting. So far, everything seems to be going smoothly. We have all of the heads of government consistently in working meetings. We can see that all throughout this day that they will be in meetings discussing different topics. We can see that this is definitely not going to be a talk shop. This is definitely going to be a conference where we have outcomes that are coming out and our people are able to produce, and we're able to see the changes. Hopefully, our nation and, of course, the region will be able to be well represented at COP27. Hopefully those larger nations and the big seven will be able to partner with us. We look forward to working with our allies like the United States of America that will also be able to petition on our behalf. We look forward to things like carbon credit. We need to be paid out. We see that most of our monies are being spent right now on rebuilding and the impacts of climate change. And so we're getting ready to come out with deliverables that will definitely be exactly what we need as we move forward. Back to you, Ewurabena.
Thank you so much, Marcos. Joining me now for our final few minutes here on Live is Shantes Dillette Wilson. Thank you so much for coming back.
Good to be back.
Oh, it's awesome. We've had so much great conversation, so much information. It's been a little bit of a, but you have the final word. What can Bahamians be hopeful about coming out of this conference? For those who are interested in following us on social media and paying attention to the interviews, what should they be looking to take away from it? And what are you hoping Bahamians take away from it?
First and foremost, I really want Bahamians to take away the priority that this is being given by our Prime Minister, by our government, by our region. I think that, perhaps some people are a little bit cynical sometimes about what politicians do, and even cynical about this subject. We've heard from our guests today how important this is for the Bahamas. Our very existence depends on it.
Sure does.
As early as maybe 80 years from now, we may not exist if we continue on the road that we're on. So we really need to be mitigating this now, and this is the first step here. So if you take anything away, it's that we are working. We are getting the ball rolling on this, getting the concrete action that we need. We are not accepting commitments and talk anymore as a nation, as a region, and I think that is really inspiring. And then also to take away exactly how important, like I said, this is for the survival of our country, and then also just the prosperity of our country, because what is it to survive if we don't have, the marine environment that we depend on, if we are in a position where our fisheries are entirely ruined by rising temperatures and rising sea levels, if we are in a position where our homes are consistently threatened by climate events, by hurricanes and increasingly bad storms and storm surges, that's not a life that we want to live. So, this is important. This is central to our existence. We are giving it the priority that it's due.
Well, I think that's a very good place to end. Thank you so much, Chantes.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for being with us for the past hour and some for the climate conversations. Be sure to stay glued to the OPM social media pages, as we'll be here to provide continued coverage of the day's events and speak with some of the movers and shakers in the region. Join us back here tomorrow morning as we dive deeper into these conversations on climate change. Till next time, I'm Ewurabena Appiah. Have a great day.